Alright, so now that we have a better understanding of how the color wheel works from a technical standpoint, let's talk about how we can actually apply that and make interesting palettes. So, the biggest distinction that we get in color theory is the one between cool colors and warm colors. Now, generally, anything on like the yellow or red side of the color wheel is going to be considered warm, while anything on the blue side is going to be considered cool. Now, I've drawn this line between yellow and then like violet and red violet, but I want you to understand that that's not specifically like a super hard and fast rule. Like I could have drawn this line maybe between the red and the green here, or like just directly between this yellow green and the red violet. But basically what it comes down to is anything that's closer to like the yellow, oranges, and reds is going to read as a lot more like warmer and inviting, while anything on like the cooler side is not going to draw the eye quite as much, and it's going to be kind of more laid back. Now, this can be applied in a lot of different ways, like for instance, like if you're designing like an Ice Queen type character, or like think like the Winter Witch from like The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, how with her using cool colors, it was very like uninviting and hostile, while like Aslan, the lion, is portrayed in all these very like warm colors and whatnot, and that's considered very like inviting. As opposed to say in like Lord of the Rings, when like they're in the Mines of Moria and like it's really dark and it's got a lot of like warm colors, that's fine. Like it's very tense and whatnot, but you know they're like more or less safe. And then when the Balrog shows up and you get all those like oranges and reds and fiery colors, it reads a lot more as danger. So although like the warm and cool colors do have this dichotomy going on, they are also very situational. But it's nice to know like what can be used for what purposes, and like if you have a piece that's dominated mostly by warm colors, cool colors are going to stand out a little bit more against those. But usually if you're trying to bring like emphasis to something in a piece, you'll want to use like warm colors versus a bunch of cool colors. So that being said, let's talk about color schemes. So this is just a quick sampling of color schemes. And going into them, I think a lot of people get caught up on the technicalities. But think of these less as like specific color schemes that you have to follow all of the time, and more like rough guidelines, right? So like you could have a mostly monochromatic piece and then like throw in a complementary color to keep some very interesting like emphasis and whatnot. Or you can do mostly analogous, but like again add a complement to get a sort of emphasis going, or even go wider than 3 colors. Like you don't have to limit yourself just based on these. These are just a really nice place to start, and if you start looking at color schemes, you'll find that a lot of them fall into here. So like split complementary, analogous, and complementary. Typically when I work on something, it's a mixture between all 3 of those. Triad is a really nice thing for like character design and whatnot, just because you get like a nice range of colors while keeping it consistent, so it's really easy to bring. Like you keep a limited palette while still getting a wide range of feeling out of all of your colors. And tetrad here is just 2 different complementary colors, like just side by side. So what does this look like in practice? So here is a piece I did as well as a Van Gogh, and you can see that like my piece is very complementary, right? So we have a lot of greens with only a couple splashes of like red. But if you look close, you can see that like this red isn't necessarily like pure red. It's kind of leaning a little bit more orange, even on like the ladybug and stuff. It's getting a lot more towards that orange side. So it's not like a perfect complement between the red and the green. It's more like leaning a little bit into maybe even a triad, even though there's nothing else going on here. Whereas this Van Gogh here, this could also be considered like an analogous with a bit of a complementary thing, right? So we have all of these like blues, even leaning into greens, but for the most part, the cool palette is dominated by these blues, and then you have this like orange going on in the grass. Even though the sky is kind of more yellow, it still reads mostly as an orange and a blue composition. This one is more purely monochromatic, as you can see, it's another one of my pieces. It's rather old, but this is all built off of the same shade of like purple, basically. Except for you can start to see I have drifted into a bit of an analogous thing, or even a complementary, getting into like a couple of like yellows and stuff, if you get in real close. I mean, but even that is mostly monochromatic. So like I said, these exist more as a guide than a hard rule. Moving on, this analogous scheme, again, a lot more Van Gogh's. I love his stuff. And you will see he uses color very effectively. But a lot of these are analogous. Like this one, you might be able to argue is a monochromatic, but it is drifting from like these deep reds up into this very bright yellow. Whereas this one has this nice turquoise sky, these very blue mountains, greens, very nicely leading into these highly saturated yellows. Very similar thing for this, although this color palette is a little bit more clocked in to the greens and the blues. So I want to show you something. This is Coolors. Now I know it's a little bit of a weird name, but coolors.co. If you just go to that, it'll bring you to you can start a generator, and what this does for you is just allows you to like generate a couple palettes. While that's getting up, I'll go back to here though. This is just a bunch of color palettes that people have saved for you to use, basically. So like you can see this one is very complementary. You've got like the blues and the oranges, but like this yellow, orange, red is very analogous, and then you have a couple of complementary colors like next to it. Again, a monochromatic one with a pop color that's not quite a complement because it's blue to red, more like a triad but without the yellow, if I'm going to be honest. This one's a nice example of a triad. You have like this nice like peachy pink, this kind of minty blue, and then this like creamsicle orange. That's a very classic triad palette, and you can see all of those are then extrapolated on and have like an analogous sort of situation going on. This one, pure monochromatic. This one you're getting some analogous with some monochromatic like variations between like this very dark shade versus this very like highly saturated yellow. This one is a great example of a complement with a bunch of different like shades on top of that. This one is a great example of a triad. You just have this orange in here. If we removed that, it'd be a perfect triad. But again, it doesn't have to be perfectly in line with the color wheel as long as it makes a very interesting palette. Those are just places for you to step off of and to start exploring with. So I highly recommend this site for you to mess with, to find like nice color palettes that you like. And if you're I think there's also a site called Paleton. I believe, yes. This one is going to let you create colors wheels more in line with like these very precise, like this is a analogous one. You've got a triad, got a tetrad here, and then like this monochromatic one. I don't like this one as much because I feel like it gives you it's a little bit too by the book for me, I'm going to be honest, but it's a really great place for you to start messing with stuff and decide like what looks good and what doesn't, and kind of it's another interactive tool that's going to help you figure out how this color scheme works. Whereas Coolors, while very interesting, and personally I like it a lot, it gives you a lot of control. Like you can start with, say I really like this palette, I can also start messing with like the hue, saturation, and luminance. It says luminance here again. Stuff like luminance, brightness, value, it all means the same thing. So like this will let me mess with stuff much like it will in Photoshop, whereas this one is going to keep you very focused on the technicalities behind these color palettes. So I know that's a very brief introduction, but I hope that it gives you some insight into how these colors can be used for your advantage, and maybe will help demystify things like the color balance or the hue and saturation windows in Photoshop. So Good luck, have fun, and again, I recommend you find some of these tools and start messing around with them, playing with them, because that hands-on experience is going to help you understand all of these very technical terms a lot better than just looking at my screen is going to.